Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's your biggest what the did I just witness in public moment? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was riding the bus once, and there was a blind man sitting next to me with his seeing eye dog. A couple stops later, a man got on with a white cane and sunglasses. They sat facing each other. 30 minutes later, when walking off the bus, they bumped into each other and both apologized, Canadians. One man grabbed the other man's arm and said, "Steve?" And they both had a good laugh. I saw a guy in a clockwork orange makeup beat up a homeless man on the subway. Someone pulled the emergency brake when we were in the station so we could throw this guy off the car. Several people complained that we were going to be late when they had to wait to release the brake, as if riding all the way to Brooklyn with this ultra-violent maniac was a better option. Saw a dude jump off a 9-story building as I was walking back from class last year. There wasn't as much blood as I expected, but there was a huge gash in his head and his limbs were all mangled. Pretty sure he died instantly. The paramedics showed up about 5 minutes later to do CPR, but he was gone. I was once sitting in town when a few very muscular guys walked along the street carrying bicycle tires. A nearly identical group of men arrived from the other way, and the two groups promptly began beating the shit out of each other with these tires like it was totally normal thing to do. The police were called and everything, and a couple of them seemed to be pretty badly injured. What? I was in Las Vegas during St. Patrick's Day 2006. I was at some hotel that was semi-Irish themed, though I cannot recall which one. They did have a beer pong competition going on, though. I was on my way to the restrooms when I saw a midget dressed like a leprechaun. He was doing his thing, walking around and having a jolly time. This girl sees him and just freaks out. She was completely smashed, just staggering about. So she sees the leprechaun, screams in excitement, and runs over to him. She then proceeds to run up and try to dance or freak with him. Think when you are in a club and rubbing against each other. So she tried to freak with him, but his head is about the height of her vagina. Oh, yeah, and she's wearing a miniskirt. Basically what happens is she ran up screaming, shoved his face into her vagina, and then gyrated for a minute while making tons of excited noise. After about a minute of this, she jumps up and cheers and runs off to the bathroom. This poor little guy just stood there, slightly staggering, and looks at me. "What the just happened?" he asked me. Unfortunately, I could not answer because I was laughing so damn hard. My daughter and I were moving from Chapel Hill, North Carolina to Apex, North Carolina. We were driving the moving truck down a rural road and saw a man who appeared to be in his late 50s mowing his yard with a riding mower. He was a very tanned guy who looked like he spent a lot of time outdoors. As we get closer, we noticed that he was sitting in the seat leaning forward slightly with his eyes closed. We had a few laughs that he was hungover or even dead. We laughed about it all the way to our new apartment. We unloaded the truck and headed back to pick up a second round of stuff from the old apartment going in reverse on the same rural road. As we passed the area where the guy on the mower had been, we saw several people standing around a sheet in the yard. The sheet was not quite large enough to completely cover the man's body. His lifeless feet were still visible. The mower he had been riding was on its side next to a tree that it had hit. Turns out the guy that we were joking about being dead was actually dead. We saw a dead guy riding his lawnmower. I was on the Berlin subway on my way to uni when something big hit the train. I was right behind the driver's cabin with a muffled sound and even dented the door I leaned against with glass dust coming out of a gap. When the train finally stopped, I stumbled out, still shocked at what happened, as I thought something solid and big must have hit the car. Well, it turned out, just as the train came into the station, a student jumped in front of the subway car, hitting the door in the center. The force was great enough to knock out the door, slamming it against the inner one to the passenger cabin. The poor guy was lying on the outer door along the driver's cabin, with the stunned driver sitting right next to him, and blood everywhere. 10 minutes later, I gave a presentation on how to solve a matrix in math class. Got an A+ for staying on topic, even though I was shivering. When I was 12 or 13, I watched a woman dancing on top of an overpass that allowed people to cross the train tracks right next to the beach. After about 20 minutes of her dancing, she was almost certainly on drugs or had some mental defect. A train horn sounded, and as it approached, she started looking at the train over-dramatically. Just as it reached the bridge, she jumped off the overpass and the train demolished her, obviously dead, a limb here, a limb there. Probably the most effed up thing I've witnessed with my own two eyes. I've seen homeless people do crazy things all the time, but there was one guy who was stirring up a load of attention. He went to a park full of kids and decided to take a bath in the park's pond. Mind you, not the cleanest of water bodies, but only so much you can do in Los Angeles. He sat down by the water's edge and very stealthily stripped down and slid into the water in a single, much-practiced motion. Several kids noticed and were lined up making jokes while mothers whisked them away, some of them no doubt calling 911 for the naked man kneeled neck-deep in the murky water. This isn't the messed up part. He then made his way to a far corner of the pond and ducked his head underwater to rinse his hair, and didn't come back up. 30 minutes later, rescue crews are sounding and surrounding the pond. Scuba teams are pacing around looking for him, and then they motion to a utility truck with a thumbs up. This man was snagged by the filtration intake and sucked underwater face first into a small pipe. Then, for 5 terrifying seconds, the dozens of children and parents gathered to watch the rescue crews. Well, they got to see the aftermath. They got to see the bloated, discolored corpse of a dead man hoisted out of a filtration pipe in a murky pond. Minutes, literally minutes of screaming. I'm positive it took weeks before those kids would take a bath again. It's pretty wild that the workers and first responders didn't clear the area to avoid traumatizing a bunch of families. Crazy. Terrible. I was sitting in a coffee shop at this sort of bar thing working on my computer. This strange-looking bigger guy sat down at the bar with a stool between us. He had a coffee and some lunch. After he finished eating his lunch, he proceeded to lift up his shirt, exposing his bare belly, which has a long vertical scab on it. He then started picking at the scab and eating the pieces. Seriously, the grossest thing I've seen. Ugh. End of winter in Philadelphia. Some homeless woman in what looked like a ski suit suddenly dropped trow and put her ass up against the side of a building, after a couple doors down from a local Chinese restaurant, and gushed liquid all over the wall. I heard the turret hitting the wall, but averted my eyes before I could tell whether it was urine or projectile diarrhea. I witnessed this from across the street, but felt really off and unclean just having seen it. I work for a pretty well-known retail company, or at least in England, and a homeless man strolls in and has a chat with my manager, who's a 20-something super cool guy. He was being friendly to the homeless guy who was wondering about the browsers, and after about 10 minutes, he just took his cock out and had a piss in front of my manager and everyone in the shop. The homeless man swiftly left, and while my manager starts mopping up his piss, he came back in and laughed at him. Why do I work in retail? Posted this before. I was walking down High Street late one night, about 2 a.m. or perhaps later, on my way home from campus. A smelly bum approaches me, and immediately I think he's going to ask for money, as is common in the area. Instead, he says, "Hey man, you see those 2 girls over there on the sidewalk across the street about half a block down, going the opposite way from me, are 2 girls wearing dresses. Each is carrying a big bouquet of flowers. I gave them flowers and I told them they were from you," the bum says, pointing at me. This guy is someone I've never met before. As I blinked uncomprehendingly, he yells loudly across the street, pointing at me with wild, exaggerated gestures. Hey girls, this is the guy, this is the guy." The girls wave the flowers at me and call out thank yous. I continue walking home confused. Strangest nightly encounter ever. In a restaurant in Prague, a bachelor party was seated in main seating. The groom was dressed as a gimp and was full frontal nude. The other men took turns spanking him with a leather flogging tool, so hard that the groom would lay on the floor screaming in pain while everyone at the party laughed. The restaurant staff kept serving them like they were out to a family dinner, and everyone around them carried on with their meals like this was a normal occurrence. Last Canada Day. I was at a street festival in our local version of a Haight-Ashbury, so there tends to be a wide selection of different people around. I was granted the gift of watching a younger homeless nomad-looking fella pick a beetle or roach thing out of his ear, nonchalantly pass it to his friend, who inspected it and gave the not bad Obama look to the guy. The friend proceeded to put the beetle thing in his breast pocket like it was something he should keep for a rainy day. Was riding on the C train in Calgary one night with a couple of friends. There was this well-dressed man who was narrating everything out. As we approached one of the downtown stops, the guy says, "Looks like we're entering downtown Calgary." My one friend is kind of annoyed by this and says, "Oh really? I thought this was Edmonton. Thanks. This was a big mistake." The guy gets set off. "I'll make this Edmonton for you." He waits for the train to come to a complete stop and reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a handful of nails and tosses them to the ground. Calmly then steps off the train, never to be seen again. Finally, I've been waiting for an opportunity to tell this story. Last winter break, I went to Colorado to go snowboarding. On the way home, I'm going through security when a woman carrying a large suitcase and rear-facing car seat runs up behind me and asks to go ahead of me. Apparently, she was running late to her flight, and it was scheduled to leave in 5 minutes. At this point, the TSA agent says that she has to put the car seat through the x-ray machine. The mom picks up the car seat and shoves it onto the moving belt, and it slides into the machine. All of a sudden, there's a violent screaming from the inside of the machine. The mom starts freaking out and crying. Now the TSA is upset as well, wondering what is going on the inside of the machine. I look at the screen and see the outline of what appears to be a small human. Next thing you know, the car seat comes out the other side, flipped on its side. There's a baby who appears to be just a few weeks old flailing inside the overturned car seat. Now everyone is yelling and there's quite a cluster occurring. The lady talked with the TSA and was pulled to a back room. Never found out if she made that flight. It makes me concerned knowing that there are people more insane than I thought possible. One time I was sitting and waiting for the bus with my friend and some guys drove by, poked their heads out of their car and just screamed obscenities at us. What made it even weirder was that they were all wearing baby masks. After that, they did a loop around the block to drive past us again. But that time they threw a ton of pens at us, like an unusual amount of pens to have in a car, maybe 60 plus pens. Anyway, the bus came before they had another chance to go around the block, so I never got to see what they were going to do next, but I doubt it was going to be good. Used to work in a supermarket. I was by the front entrance when I saw a mother and her daughter, who must have been about 12 or 13 years old, walk into the store. The daughter started to complain to her mother, and so the mother picked her up and put the daughter in the seat part of the cart that is normally reserved for toddlers. They walked about 10 feet, and the cart fell forward and snapped the girl's tibia. The bone pierced the skin. My manager ran up when we heard screaming and saw what had happened, and then proceeded to puke at a potted plant. It was pretty horrifying. 10 to 15 years ago, saw a large gas main explosion on the outskirts of the city. We were just leaving my house and saw a fireball rising from the horizon. It looked like a sunrise coming up from the south, just before the real sun was setting in the west. Insane, surreal moment. Worse, when it came up in the mushroom shape. I seriously thought we witnessed World War III starting. We ended up driving to see what it was, and about 10 miles away from a field off the highway with a huge stream of flame coming out of the ground.